Welcome, my friends, to the Quay Radio Hour, your home for free and critical thinking, and I'm your host, Mike Williams. And joining me for this show is my partner, Rebecca. Tonight, my very special guests are Doctors Jack and Melissa Weber of the Carolina Clinic of Natural Medicine located in Cary, North Carolina. Dr. Jack is a doctor of naturopathic medicine, a doctor of chiropractic medicine, and has a bachelor's degree in biomedical science with a concentration in nutrition. Dr. Mel is also a doctor of chiropractic medicine, along with having a master's degree in Oriental medicine. She is a licensed acupuncturist, a Chinese herbalist, and like Dr. Jack, has a bachelor's in biomedical science with a concentration in nutrition. She is a licensed massage and bodywork therapist, health fitness technician, and fitness trainer. In this show, Dr. Jack and Dr. Mel will discuss how natural medicine and alternative health approaches can successfully treat depression without the need for pharmaceuticals. And to kick the show off, I asked both Dr. Mel and Dr. Jack to tell us about their journey in life and how it has led to the remarkable work they are doing today. And so without further ado, here's Dr. Jack and Dr. Mel.
Well, hello, Mike. First of all, I want to say thank you for having me on your show today. I'd like to say that I began my journey into natural medicine actually starting in the health and fitness field almost 2 decades ago, before fitness and diets of the many varieties that today came into the media's attention or on the internet or in our communities. As a fitness instructor and personal trainer, I dealt with people on a group and individual basis and would be consistently asked advice about exercise, diet, aches, pains, emotional well-being, not only for themselves, but also for friends and family. And I realized through that I really had a true responsibility here to educate and influence people, which is my passion, today. As far as physical fitness, I've always deeply rooted that in all of my treatments with patients and value it. And looking at it from a scientific perspective, it does help to upregulate neurochemicals and create new synapses in our brains, which helps to enhance the function of our brain and enhance our mood. So it has a great benefit. In terms of looking at my health fitness background and moving forward, I was always intrigued with the human body and the facilitation of healing of it. And that's actually what drew me into doing things like massage therapy, Asian body work, chiropractic care. A lot of people may not know this, but chiropractic actually means done by hand. And, that medicine is unbelievable in terms of what it can do to help enhance the normal or the body's self-regulating process with little to no side effects, right? Which is something that I think is lost in our current medical model. Touch is lost. And I feel like it's a necessity for healing. Not only that, but if we look at the intervention itself, it helps to adjust the nervous system, our immune system, our endocrine system, our digestive system, and it's going to help to influence self-regulation of those biochemical processes, right? Our body itself is a self-regulating system, and these interventions help to do that with the use of touch. In compliance with that, I also wanted to pursue more education in internal medicine, looking at nutrition and biomedical science and Chinese herbal medicine, and working with subsequent patients. I've seen a true disconnect between food, medicine, and disease. I feel if we use the nature around us nutritionally to facilitate wellness, there's no question, that nutrition impacts our health directly. So it's very important to me to have that understanding and to complete more education in those aspects of health, to bring them into what I do with my care. In regards to treatment with mental health, I actually had the benefit of spending many years in a PTSD veterans and whole health clinic, utilizing traditional Chinese medicine and acupuncture, as well as in my own practice here at the Carolina Clinic of Natural Medicine. And utilizing these interventions, I've been absolutely blown away by the benefits of this medicine for mental health. On the other side of the coin, I've been disheartened with seeing the current allopathic model of use, because there's just so much abuse and overuse of pharmaceuticals in the population, and there really is a lack of benefit for the patient's wellness overall. And we'll talk more about that in just a little bit, but a lot of the patients I've seen are struggling with side effects from pharmaceuticals, having small windows of success and regression, or having to add more drugs, or just being on drugs for years and not feeling well. I've seen a lack of evaluation of nutrition, a lack of nutritional guidance, lack of evaluation of imbalances, and really a lack of education just in lifestyle management, like exercise or including practices, like meditation, massage, introducing themselves to cognitive behavioral therapy or even hypnosis. Now, the topic that we're talking about today, I'm not trying to bash on allopathic medicine for the care of mental health, but it's more or less to shine a light on the problems of this model and to educate people that there are interventions and ways to become more proactive in their health. And 1 in 4 Americans, and this includes children and geriatric populations, are on a psychiatric pharmaceutical prescription right now, today in the United States. And we see this as something that really needs to be taken seriously. And we're hoping that this information will help to start a conversation for those listening today.
Excellent, Melissa. How about you, Jack? How did you wind up doing what you're doing today?
As you already stated, you had brought up the fact that I was a 5th-generation chiropractic physician. And so my experience through childhood is I was always exposed to natural medicine. So it was kind of the norm in my house. And so that's what I was used to. And, as I started to get older and was able to make my own health decisions, I found myself going down an unhealthy path. And by the age of 18, I was out of shape. I was sick. I was tired. And I really wasn't happy with where I was in my life. And I kind of had a spiritual experience at that age. And through that spiritual experience, I realized that I wasn't taking care of myself and I needed to shift that. And also in doing that and starting to take care of myself by eating differently and exercising, I realized that my purpose in life was to help other people. And that still is my primary drive today. Is my purpose on this earth is to help other individuals, whether that's through medicine or some other type of approach. And so that led me to an education. For me, I realized that the type of work I was doing at 18 wasn't going to sustain me for the rest of my life spiritually and also financially. So I knew that I had to get a higher education in order to pursue the things that really met with my values. And so that led me into nutrition and bodybuilding, which farther led me into my education in biomedical science with a concentration in nutrition. Having been exposed so much through childhood to chiropractic medicine, I kind of was just driven to it. It wasn't forced on me. It was something that I reached out towards as I got older because I saw that this was what I wanted to do. And so through that process, I started with my bachelor's degree. And that's where I met Dr. Mel, actually, in anatomy class. Every week we kind of found ourselves sitting next to each other, and that relationship built over time. And eventually we started medical school together. And I actually wasn't even aware of what naturopathic medicine was until I started my chiropractic medical training. And naturopathic medicine is something that I absolutely just fell in love with the first time I was exposed to it. And I really had never had an experience with it before. So it was all new to me. And it was very complementary to what we were already learning and what I already had a firm belief in. So that's where I picked up the other doctorate in medicine, which is in naturopathic medicine. And through our time in our education, we worked with other providers in the Chicagoland region. That was where our medical school was based. And so we worked with other practitioners, which really gave us a lot of real world experience, so that Dr. Mel and I decided to open our own practice. And if you've never experienced negative 40 degrees in Chicago, you will soon find that, we decided we needed to get out of town. It was getting a little too cold for us and some other reasons. So that's why we decided to come out to the Southeast, and is why we practice just outside of Raleigh, North Carolina today. And we wanted to start a practice that could offer a one place for a patient to come and have their whole body, mind, and spirit treated. And with Dr. Mel and I's education, we really complement each other. And so we figured that we would go ahead and establish that practice. And, we can talk a little bit about that a little bit later on. But that's kind of what drove us to our current clinic today. Was we wanted to start something new. We want to be that change. We want to shift the paradigm of medicine, because the current model that's in place, unfortunately, is not sustainable, and it's not supporting health. It's really supporting disease, which is really unfortunate.
Yes, and as Dr. Mel had mentioned, we're not going to vilify allopathic medicine. This show is going to be about bringing to the forefront that there is an alternative to allopathic medicine when dealing with mental illness and depression. And it's interesting, I went onto the web today and I pulled a definition of allopathic medicine, and here's what it said. Allopathic medicine is an expression commonly used by homeopaths and proponents of other forms of alternative medicine to refer to mainstream medical use of pharmacology, active agents, or physical interventions to treat or suppress symptoms or pathophysiologic processes of diseases or conditions. It's like a mouthful, but what I get from that is allopathic medicine is about drugs, the pharmacology aspect of this, and surgery. So we're going to discuss depression from a different perspective, and that perspective is oriented toward the health of the mind and the body. One of the things that I have found, and I think you guys know this, I'm a certified hypnotherapist, and I've been in practice for 7 years. And one of the things that I see many, many times is dealing with depression. And it comes up a lot. And so that's why I thought that this show was going to be very beneficial to a lot of people, because in our culture, in our society today, the only thing people really know if you're feeling depressed or you're feeling anxious is to go to your general practitioner and they're going to prescribe a drug. We all know a lot of folks that are suffering and dealing with mental illness. And Dr. Mel, you had mentioned a statistic. Was it 1 in 4?
1 in 4.
That's 25% of the population, right? So that's a very, very big number. So what would be the approach from your perspective?
Really, the biggest difference when we take a patient in for a first encounter is we take a very thorough medical history. So traditionally, first visits with either Dr. Muller or myself are typically about 90 minutes to 120 minutes in length. And that's one-on-one with the doctor, not working with a nurse or a physician assistant or a certified nursing assistant. Those are phenomenal professions and they support us. But when it comes to practicing medicine, we really need to have the totality of what's going on with the patient. And so having that amount of time to sit down with a patient and get a full history of what's going on, asking questions like, when did the depression start? What were the precipitating factors to the depression? Have you lost a loved one? Have you had a recent newborn? Have you lost a job? Have you moved somewhere? Getting all that clinical information that's led up to the depression and that's contributing to the depression and finding out what's making it worse, what's making it better, is all very important information clinically to give us a direction on where we need to go. Most physicians can do that in a short amount of time, but the problem is that most physicians don't get to the other part of what's going on. They don't look at, well, what is this patient eating? What time are they going to bed? Are they sleeping at least 8 hours a night? How are they digesting their food? What types of foods are they eating that's balancing their mental health throughout the day by supporting their blood sugar? What do their relationships look like at home? Are they married? Are they recently divorced? Do they have adult children in the house? Do they have teenagers in the house? Do they have, all these different things that should be explored in that visit need to be talked about, and also looking at the full picture. And that also includes other diagnoses that the patient may come in with. Oftentimes, what's lacking is that we're not looking at the whole picture. We're just looking at the symptoms of depression. And many times there's things that are contributing factors that aren't talked about. One of the biggest ones I see in practice is hypothyroidism. And that's a condition where your thyroid, which regulates your metabolism, your body weight, your energy, is underactive, meaning it's not working to its full function. That has a huge impact on your mental health. If you don't have energy, you're gaining weight, you aren't having bowel movements, and your digestion isn't working properly, I would be depressed too. I wouldn't feel well. I don't feel like getting out of bed or exercising or engaging in activities that used to make me happy. I just want to sit around and not do too much. And so just prescribing a drug that's going to affect your serotonin or other neurotransmitters isn't going to fix the underlying problem. And that's just one example, right? There's many examples that are co-occurring conditions to depression, but that's just one that kind of gives us some light to that. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it makes perfect sense. And what about food? I'm of the belief that people with poor diets, poor nutrition, eating the wrong foods, eating a lot of processed foods, GMO foods, contribute to problems with the mind and problems with the body. Because when you're taking in stuff into your body that the body doesn't really recognize, the body then has to exert energy and figure out what to do with this stuff. So what part, Melissa or Jack, does nutrition or food play into this?
Sure. That's a phenomenal question. And I kind of want to take a step back also and kind of look at how the traditional model that's being practiced right now doesn't look at food. So the traditional medical model when it comes to mental health and other chronic conditions and acute conditions is really based on reductionism. And the basic premise of reductionism is to break or reduce down complex biological symptoms or systems rather into single parts or part. So what that means is instead of looking at the body as a whole, we take the individual and just look at at one system. And so that is a huge problem right now. And looking at nutrition is no longer looking through the lens of reductionism. It's looking at a vitalistic approach and a whole body approach. And so the importance of nutrition and kind of some of the things that you've iterated up to this point is balancing blood sugar is a huge thing. And what that means is that we need to have small, frequent meals throughout the day. And those meals need to be balanced with different macronutrients. And macronutrients is simply carbohydrates, proteins, and fats. We need to have a good combination on every meal that we consume. And so typically about half of your plate should be a fibrous vegetable. And so an example of that would be spinach, broccoli, cauliflower, something along those lines. The other 50% is broken into quarters. So 1/4 or 25% should be some type of protein, some type of lean protein. And that protein should be coming from a source that's sustainable and one that doesn't use a lot of hormones and those types of things. So typically organic and grass-fed is going to be extremely important. That's a whole nother conversation that we can have. Lastly, the other quarter of the plate should be a complex carbohydrate. So that's going to be something like sweet potatoes, brown rice, quinoa, something along those lines. And when you eat foods in those combinations, you allow your blood sugar to stay nice and sustained through the next 3 to 4 hours to come. And after that 3 to 4 hour period, we should eat another small meal. And so typically we should be eating 3 meals a day and 2 snacks. That, first of all, is going to balance our blood sugar, which is extremely important. And stepping back from the reductionist viewpoint and looking at the totality of the human body, when our blood sugar is not in balance, it inhibits the ability of neurotransmitters to be formed in our brain. So what ends up happening is when your blood sugar is up and down, you stop the ability of your brain to function optimally at producing neurotransmitters. And neurotransmitters are just messengers that work in our brain cells that cause different types of actions, whether they're excitatory or stimulatory or inhibitory in nature. And so that would be the number one place, is balancing blood sugar. The other thing which you kind of mentioned was getting away from processed foods. Typically, my suggestion is if you can't pronounce it on the ingredients label, or there's more than 5 to 6 ingredients, it's probably not something that we should be putting in our bodies, because our bodies don't know how to recognize it and utilize it to make things like neurotransmitters, because neurotransmitters are all formed from proteins. And so those proteins have to come from our body, specifically amino acids. And so you can get it from a vegetarian-based diet as well. It's not what I'm saying. But it's important that we're getting enough of those amino acids, which are the building blocks to our neurotransmitters. So if we look upstream at what's going on, that's the first place that we address when we work with patients clinically, is until our diet's in place, and we need to first provide the nutrients that's going to support neurotransmission. And until that's in place, it's really hard to move forward with other interventions, which may be necessary as well. Does that answer your question?
It does. How hard or how easy is it to get people to adopt and to accept the fact that they have to change their diet?
It can be a challenge. The unfortunate thing, it is an uphill battle. I mean, we are generations into the TV nation, right? And if we watch TV, what do we see? Lots of fast food commercials, lots of emphasis on treats, or looking at celebrations that bring, sugary snacks or cakes or sodas, or fast food just in general. And, people have kind of adopted a culture of eating for pleasure rather than, eating for health. But once you start to sit down individually with somebody and get to the root of what their problem is, and they can sit with you and see, okay, this is how I'm eating, this is what's impacting my health, we start to unravel, those misconceptions that people have about their health. And we see good results when people, are included in their health and take what we have to say seriously and integrate it into their lives.
Dr. Mel, how do you deal with or handle clients that come in that are already on antidepressants or anti-anxiety medications? They're coming to you and perhaps they're saying, I'm on these drugs. I really don't want to be on them anymore, or I'm on the drugs and they're not really helping. I'm assuming you get those types of situations and circumstances. How does that work?
Well, definitely. Unfortunately, I see a lot of that in my practice. And the wonderful thing about my background with traditional Chinese medicine is that it has a pretty profound effect with dealing with mental health. And I'm going to kind of go into an overview of that since you've asked the question here. So just to kind of backtrack, traditional Chinese medicine has been used for about 5,000 years. And it's a very large topic in itself, so I'm just going to narrow it down to what we're talking about today for time. Otherwise, we could be here all night, right? If we look at the evolution of Western medicine, it has separated mind and body, okay, which views our body as a complex system of biological parts rather than a holistic unit. Mental health is often considered a completely separate issue from physical well-being. The two have always been linked together in the practice of Chinese medicine. In TCM, which is what I'll refer it to, emotions and thoughts are considered to have a direct impact on the physical health of a person. And furthermore, mental and physical health are equally valued. And basically, if we come down to it in TCM, mental health disorders are a disturbance of the flow of qi in the body. I'm going to expand upon that a little bit more. So what qi flow means is it's something that occurs through the channels of our body and allows us to move our arms and legs, for our organs to perform their functions, such as breathing or pumping blood, digesting food. It helps our immune system to respond, and for our brains to think and function, right? So without qi or energy, the body is lifeless, right? Where do we see this? We see this in blood, lymph, nerves. Qi flows in a vessel system. We call this an acupuncture meridian or an acupuncture channel in my medicine. The channels begin at the fingers and toes. They travel up through the torso, through our various organs, making connections together and up into the head. It has many functions. And in Chinese medicine, if you seek a practitioner, they'll use words like warming, cooling, moistening, nourishing, drying, and all of these help to promote the normal function of the organs, provide an energy, for different processes of our body, regulate the body, protect the body, and ensure that our organs are remained in their proper positions. The most important thing, though, is what I want to say about qi is that it helps to maintain balance in our body, okay? So it's a homeostatic mechanism by which our body can heal itself and establish a state of wellness. If it encounters an imbalance that's going on, our body naturally, if in good health, will bring that back to a balance. But if there's something going on with the body, and I'm going to expand upon that a little bit more, say a blockage exists as the impeding flow, or a patient's coming in with patterns that show a deficiency or an excess, then healing is not going to transform. It won't take place. Okay. So there's many techniques that we use in traditional Chinese medicine to help unblock channels or expel pathologic factors that interfere with normal processes, or help to boost qi, as we would say, in situations where people are coming in with deficiencies. These imbalances altogether, they lead to many problems, not just emotional, but also physical. So it's a very important place for the mind for traditional Chinese medicine. In terms of these methods that we have available in our profession, they're geared mostly towards renewing healing and helping to upkeep mental wellness altogether. The aim in traditional Chinese medicine is to treat people uniquely as individuals, okay? And their symptoms are going to improve overall through a very thorough diagnosis and management, which Dr. Weber actually spoke about. So a patient may come in with the same Western diagnosis, like depression, but they're going to be treated differently based upon what I see with them, interacting with them and coming to a conclusion based on the diagnosis that they're given and management of care. It's going to utilize different acupuncture points, different lifestyle, dietary, or herbal medicine recommendations. Looking at acupuncture just in a whole, in terms of Western, I guess, more scientific means, if we were to look into the Journal of Endocrinology, I'll cite them. Acupuncture has been proven to lower blood hormone levels secreted by the hypothalamus pituitary adrenal axis. And that's a very important thing to understand. This is something that controls reactions to stress. It regulates our processes like our immune system, our digestion, our emotions. And it's also going to have a direct reflection on something called NPY, which is a neuropeptide that's secreted when we have a fight or flight response. And this is something that you'll see that increases in anxiety, insomnia, PTSD, and we can upregulate and lower these levels using acupuncture. There's also information out there that talks in a little more complex terms. But if we look at where acupuncture points are on the body, they're in higher concentrations of areas where there's a lot of nerve endings and bundles, mast cells, lymphatics, capillaries. And there's actually a lower resistance of electricity going on in those areas, which causes increased signaling. It's right in the fascia of our body. There's literature out there that's showing an abundance of information showing how acupuncture influences the release, synthesis, reuptake, and degradation of neurotransmitters. Okay, so we're looking at monoamines, which like serotonin, noradrenaline, dopamine, acetylcholine, GABA, and other factors. Acupuncture actually helps to regulate this expression and function corresponding with the receptors, and it is capable of modulating the brain function. Okay, I find this very fascinating, and it's very promising, as we move forward scientifically using this ancient wisdom to see how much it's aiding, people who are suffering with mental health conditions. But I use acupuncture in conjunction with Chinese herbs, and I feel like together they're the best intervention when I treat mental illness. And for those of you who don't really understand Chinese herbs, going to talk about that. It's something also that's been used for thousands of years. And when we look at Chinese herbs, primarily they're plants, but there's also some minerals, some animal products are there. Different parts of plants, such as leaves, roots, stems, flowers, seeds are used. When I use them, usually I combine them with formulas and I give them in forms of like tea, capsules, liquid extracts, granules, powders. So there's many different ways that they can be used with patients. Medicinally, looking at when I put together a formula for a patient, it's really going to be based upon, once again, their individual TCM diagnosis. So every person is going to be different in the way that I will, constitutionally prepare a formulation for them. And the thing about the formulation is they're going to be herbs that are acting directly on the problem, but also herbs that are going to help the body absorb it, help the body do what it's supposed to do naturally by self-regulating. So they have minimal side effects. The take-home message really with herbal formulas is that they're gentle and that they can help treat symptoms and underlying causes of disease without the side effects and withdrawals like pharmaceutical interventions. And they don't just work by directly impacting a specific receptor or neurotransmitter like the current pharmaceutical interventions. It's not created in a lab. This is nature. And, once again, I feel this is a very promising field of study. And I've seen the direct impact of these interventions working with patients with mental illness. TCM is something that's only been in the States since the 70s, and it's evolving into our medical system more and more. I know right now there's a lot of information out there regarding pain management, especially with the current opioid crisis. But mental health is definitely a close second, and it's up and coming, and there's more and more introduction of acupuncture and Chinese medicine, with people with addictions, in treatments for like depression, anxiety, PTSD, insomnia, I definitely encourage people to welcome TCM into their healthcare. But to answer your question directly about people that come in that are on pharmaceuticals is that, traditional Chinese medicine can still help them, right? So even though the medication that they're on is impacting the chemical process that's happening within the brain, if say they're on an antidepressant, traditional Chinese medicine can't come in and find what the root cause of what their problem is and treat that from an herbal standpoint without interacting with that pharmaceutical. As a matter of fact, it will help adjust the central nervous system. So it's going to help the body interact with that antidepressant differently in a way that will allow the body not to have the side effects. So if a patient comes to me and they're still having insomnia, there's gentle herbs that I can give to them to help them sleep, which is going to help their body metabolize their drugs better. So that's just one example, but if people come to me and they want to get off of their medications, that's something that I need to work with their prescribing physician. I don't take and entertain the idea of taking people off of their drugs. That's not, what I'm here to say is get off all of your drugs. But what I'm saying is that, depending upon the situation and where the patient is in their life and what their background is medically, we can, infiltrate a natural foundation and get them in a place where their body can be in a better state of healing and a better state of wellness, and ultimately not have to be on an intervention if it is pertinent for that patient. Does that make sense?
No, that makes perfect sense, Dr. Mel. And one of the reasons why I asked the question is because many, many doctors in Western medicine will tell their patients that once they start these drugs, once they're on these antidepressants and these anti-anxiety medications, that they are on them forever, that there's no going back. So when your patients or your clients come to see you, what do you do to work with them to get around that paradigm? How do you get them to, what's the process to, I'm assuming, to wean them off these drugs and get them into a more natural mode of treating their depression or their anxiety?
That's a great question, Mike. And it's definitely something that I want to explain a little bit about why these drugs are used. So when you look at depression, they actually go off of what's called the serotonin theory. And the serotonin theory of clinical depression is about 50 years old. In its simplest form, the hypothesis proposes that diminished activity of serotonin pathways actually causes depression. And so that leads us to focus treating depression by increasing serotonin, which is what drugs do, right? The problem is that that's just a theory. There is absolutely no research that substantiates those claims, okay? And all of that information is pumped into physicians by pharmaceutical companies, okay? So if you look at because we are trained in pharmacy and surgery in our medical education, when it comes to antidepressants, they're actually not meant to be prescribed for long term. They're actually only meant to be prescribed for about 3 months. And so the problem is when they're only prescribed for 3 months and you don't have a plan in place to get a patient off of them, no doctor in their right mind is going to take them off of them for a few reasons. One is they have nothing to replace the drug, right? So imagine you do hypnotherapy. So imagine a client's coming to you on a weekly basis for depression, and they've been coming to you for 2 months straight every week with great effects, right? Their life has changed because of the hypnotherapy. And now you're saying, okay, we're going to stop the hypnotherapy completely. And you know that the patient isn't going to do too well with that, right? Let's just say, for example, that they stopped the hypnotherapy completely and they regressed right back to their depressive state. Wouldn't you continue the hypnotherapy on and on and on? And, that may not be the best example, but what I'm trying to get to is that doctors don't have anything to put in place of the pharmaceutical drug. And so I, as a physician, wouldn't say, okay, you've been feeling great for 8 weeks by exercising, eating right, and doing meditation. Now that your depression's gone, I want you to go ahead and stop those things, right? That's not going to work. And so that's the first problem is, these drugs are not meant to be prescribed long term. But the problem is that doctors don't have anything in place. Traditional conventional medicine does not have anything in place once they remove those prescriptions. Secondly, the pharmaceutical drugs that are coming out today are more than just serotonin reuptake inhibitors. You have what's called selective serotonin reuptake inhibitors, as well as norepinephrine and epinephrine. They're very stimulatory neurotransmitters. And so the problem is when you try to come off of these drugs, you're addicted to them, right? And so your body goes through a very horrible withdrawal. A little bit different than other types of drugs like opioids or illicit drugs. But the main problem is that a lot of times patients have brain fog, brain zaps. They have thoughts of suicide. They have severe depression coming off of this because what they've been doing is they're taking a drug that has been increasing their serotonin to levels that your body just is not used to. And so once you're on that, it's hard to come off if you don't have a plan in place. And that's what's missing, because most people who go to their primary care doctor, they go in and they get a prescription and they're only looking at the short term. And what we really need to be looking at is what's the long-term plan here? What does your mental health look like 6 months from now? And how do we get you to that point? And unfortunately, you can't do that in a 10-minute visit with your doctor.
No, the brain zaps, I know folks that have missed dosages of their antidepressant or anti-anxiety medication, and they will say that they have these zaps, or they feel detached, almost like a dissociative state. What is that bridge, though, Jack or Melissa? In other words, you're saying, well, okay, you can't come off these drugs like that and expect that it's going to be okay, because, like you said, with these newer drugs, they're addictive, and people are suffering physical symptoms from missing dosages or maybe just stopping. So what is that bridge? What is that transition from being on the drugs and weaning them off the drugs and getting on to a program that you will take your patients through?
That goes back to your last question, which I'd love to answer for you. Is I think it's really important to understand it's definitely a case-by-case basis. So typically most patients who present to our practice have been on these pharmaceuticals for longer than, say, 2 months, right? They've been on them for years sometimes, or just up to a year. And so typically we share with those patients out front, and I'd like the listeners today to also take this information in, is that you can't just stop these drugs out of nowhere, because the effects are not going to be good. And unfortunately, it can lead to things like suicide. And so the importance is that we share with our patients that this is typically about a 3 to 6 month process. And in the first 3 months of establishing this process, we need to start with the determinants of health. We need to support that first. And so the things that determine our health are some topics that we've already talked about: the food that we eat, the exercise we engage in, the relationships that we have, the sleep that we get, and the things that we do for relaxation. That's the foundation for health. So that's where we start with every single patient. And that's different if they're more acute or not acute, meaning that, they can't get out of bed or they're thinking about hurting themselves or other people. So starting with that foundation, a lot of times patients start to feel better. And then what we can do is we can start to implement natural therapies such as botanical medicine, herbal medicine. But clinically, what I've seen most efficacious is acupuncture. That by far has just done a profound effect for many patients that we work with. I mean, we have patients who come to our office who can't even speak, who have such a state of anxiety that they can't talk. They're crying uncontrollably, and their doctor or primary care physician doesn't know what to do. And aside from, well, let's add another prescription on top of what you're already taking. I've seen patients in one session of acupuncture go from that state of unable to talk and conscious inability to put together their thoughts and those types of things, with one treatment of acupuncture, get off the table and walk out the door with a smile on their face, right? And I don't want to give what that means is, we can start there and start to build up. I'm not saying that they're healed from that point forward, right? But we can get patients very quickly who are in those acute states to a better space with acupuncture. And once we start to accumulate a few days of that good intervention, then we can start to apply traditional Chinese medicine. Because you have to be very cautious when it comes to natural therapies. You want to make sure, as a physician, I need to know what you're on, because I don't want to prescribe anything that's going to interact with the drugs that you're on or have an additive effect, meaning it's going to make the drugs that you're on work even more. So that's where Chinese medicine really comes into a huge play with Chinese herbal preparations and acupuncture, because that facilitates the body's natural process. It doesn't go in and artificially stimulate those neurotransmitters or inhibit them. It goes in and it just tonifies the body and calms your body down. Not like a sedative though, but more of just a constitutional, let's go in and clean it out and get things working properly again. And then from there, as we start to progress, we start implementing other things like hypnotherapy is phenomenal, energy medicine, YouTube meditation guides, also massage therapy is phenomenal. And so as you start to accumulate those good things, over time, you can start to talk to your prescribing doctor to slowly come off of the dosage. In my personal experience is I prefer to reach out to pharmacists over most prescribing physicians, because a physician's trained in pharmacology, but a pharmacist is trained in pharmacy, right? So they live, breathe, and eat it. So they understand, how do you take a patient off of this medication? Okay, well, you start with 50 milligram dosage and you need to drop it down to 40 for X amount of days and so on and so forth. And so typically it's a 3-month process, just to be honest with you, for patients who have been on it for a while, because without that foundation in place, we've got to have something there once that pharmaceutical is removed to pick up the pieces.
Now, Dr. Jack and Dr. Mel, I know this is a very difficult question to answer, but I'm going to ask it because I know the audience is probably asking it of themselves as they're listening to this show. What is the success rate, or how do you measure success for patients or clients who come to see you and follow your process or your protocol to get themselves off of these drugs? Now, with my own practice, my hypnotherapy practice, many times I will be asked the question, how successful are you at getting people to quit smoking or to release weight and so on? And my discussion point with them is always that it's directly linked to the level of commitment that the client has to their own success. In other words, they have to be invested in the process. So again, I know this is a very difficult question to answer, but I know that folks who are listening to the show right now are asking this question to themselves. They have to be wondering, so what is the success rate? Because it goes back to what we said before, that most people have been conditioned to believe that you can't come off these drugs, that it's something that you're going to be on forever. So a discussion about coming off them and not having to be reliant on these drugs anymore might seem very foreign to them. So could you take us through that a little bit?
That is a challenging question to answer, because as you stated, it takes a commitment. Some patients don't have that commitment. And if a patient comes in and we don't feel that they're ready to implement those changes, or they state that they're not, we tell them that this may not be the best alternative for you then, and that you may need to explore some other options. But I would say patients who commit to the changes that I've kind of outlined for you already, I see 100% success rate in getting them off of antidepressants and supporting their mood from a natural standpoint. And what I also need to share about that is, with those patients who do come off of those drugs, it's very important that we always tell them, you've got to stay in contact with us. When things occur in life that are stressors for you, you've got to come in and get treated. And when you're proactive about it that way, and you don't wait for a problem to occur, the long-term effects of that are going to be phenomenal. And I think another intervention that I haven't really shared is cognitive behavioral therapy. That is more efficacious than the pharmaceutical drugs. And there's numerous clinical trials and research out there that clearly identifies cognitive behavioral therapy being more effective than the pharmaceutical drugs that treat things like depression. Okay, so typically, once those patients are on a stable level, it's all about just supporting them. So some patients we don't see for a whole year. They're out living life, which is what we want. We want patients out of our clinic. It's a bad business model, right? We want patients to stay away. We want to get them better and keep them better, right? We don't want them being dependent on what we're doing, just like we don't want them dependent on drugs. So I hope that answered your question as well, but it's definitely something that once they're in that stable point, supporting them as things come up, those healthy stressors of, having a newborn or losing your mother or walking your mother through hospice or your father through hospice. You've got to come in and you've got to get treated, whether that's through cognitive behavioral therapy, acupuncture, massage, or some of the other things that we've already listed.
I have a question, Dr. Jack. Or Dr. Mel. So how do you support your patients through cognitive behavioral therapy? Is it something you provide, or is it something you refer people to?
We're trained in counseling as well. It's part of our medical education. But we also work very closely with other providers in the area. And that's what we really prefer, is to take a co-management with other practitioners. And what that means is that when I refer a patient for cognitive behavioral therapy, I call that therapist. I tell them about this patient's history. I tell them about my clinical assessment, and I tell them where I'd like to go with this patient. And that's where integrative medicine is really going to fill the current hole that's being placed in our medical approach now. But yes, we do specific cognitive behavioral therapy in office. And that's kind of a broad umbrella term for many different interventions, but it's definitely something that we find extremely efficacious, whether it's being provided through our practitioners out of our clinic or being co-managed with other colleagues in the community. And that's also a patient preference, right? I tell patients, if you go once, you can't just go one time. Shop around, find somebody you can sit down with and talk about this stuff with. There's all types of different approaches, and you just need to explore and find somebody that you feel comfortable with, whether that's with us or with somebody else. I really don't care. I just want you to get better.
Another situation that I have bumped up against with my hypnotherapy practice, and it's primarily with military people. These clients will come to see me because they want to work on, maybe their mind is a little foggy, or they just don't feel right. They feel disconnected or dissociated, and, those types of things. And come to find out that they are on multiple antidepressants or anti-anxiety medications. Maybe they're on 2 or 3 of them, maybe even 4. And this is referred to as cocktails. And because they have been told by their physicians in the military that they need to be on these drugs, the 3 or 4 of them, in order to function properly, in order to feel better, they never attribute whatever it is that's going on. Let's just say they do have foggy thoughts, or they just feel detached. They never associate it with the drugs. And this becomes a little difficult because they're believing it's something outside of the pharmaceutical. And I was just wondering, as we've been talking, how do you deal with that? How do you deal with clients that come in that are on these cocktails? Because that has to make the job exponentially more difficult to treat.
Absolutely. And that's something that we're really trying to bring some more awareness with, because what you also have to take into consideration is many of our veterans who are coming back from active duty are actually also coming back with chronic pain as well. And so what ends up happening is they're prescribed opioids and muscle relaxants, which are extremely addictive. So now what we have are people who are struggling with or living with PTSD and now an opioid addiction, right? And so now we have what's called a dually diagnosed patient, someone who has an addiction problem and a mental health problem. And so we do see that a lot. And unfortunately, our veterans who are coming back, whose only medical care is through TRICARE. I don't know if you're familiar with that term. TRICARE is the medical insurance that's extended to military and their families. You are kind of stuck in the traditional approach. And when you go to the VA hospital, you're not going to meet with an acupuncturist. You're not going to meet with a naturopathic physician. You may meet with a chiropractic physician, and this is a problem. There's been legislation passed for 20 years for there to be a chiropractic physician in every single military installation throughout the United States. That legislation was passed over 15 years ago, and it still hasn't happened. Okay. And so they're not really set up for success because they don't have exposure to practitioners who know how to do anything but prescribe drugs. And so what ends up happening is, they're being told you've got to stick on these drugs, and this is the only way that you're going to get fixed. And that's just not true. But unfortunately, it's the only thing that A, they're exposed to, or B, that they have access to. And so we do work with veterans as well. And, their treatment's, no different than any other patients in our practice. But typically it does tend to lead more towards PTSD, and that in itself is a similar treatment approach, but does have some different clinical interventions that are effective as well.
Now, the current medical system, Western medicine, really creates an environment where the patient is dependent upon the medical system, dependent upon the pharmaceuticals. So maybe, I know we've covered a bit of this already in the conversation so far, but if maybe Dr. Mel or Dr. Jack, if you could just take us through what you believe are some of the problems associated with the current paradigm in mental health care. What are the things that are being done that, in your mind, maybe are not the best things for the person? If you could take us through that a little bit, that would be great.
Sure. So, there are many problems with the current medical paradigm, both with mental health and other chronic conditions. But truly, most of these things can be true for all conditions, whether mental health, cardiovascular disease, diabetes. But to me, one of the biggest problems in the current paradigm of conventional medicine is that they no longer look at a patient as a whole, which is something that we already discussed. Medicine has become so specialized that you really only look at one organ for a patient. And so you're only looking at the patient's thyroid, or you're only looking at their digestive tract, or you're only looking at their joints, or you're only looking at fill in the blank. And so that's a huge problem because A, you don't have communication amongst practitioners. B, you're not taking the totality of what builds up the human system. We are mind, body, and spirit, and everything's interconnected. When we don't address all those aspects to healthcare, then we're really missing the big picture. The other problem is that most physicians are trained primarily in conventional diagnosis and treatment, which entails drug, surgery, radiation, so on and so forth. They're really not well qualified to apply prevention-focused interventions such as nutrition, diet, and exercise to help patients minimize their risk of suffering from one or more of the major chronic diseases in this country. And some of those chronic diseases are heart disease, diabetes, autoimmune conditions, mental illness, and cancer. In addition to those preventative strategies, I would have to say that many complex and chronic diseases are very, very responsive to dietary and other lifestyle interventions. But clinicians without those skills are literally at the mercy of the pharmaceutical industry. And so what that means is that doctors are taught by drug companies on what to do. And drug companies work really, really hard to persuade them to select the newest and most expensive drugs, even in the absence of the ability for them to be scientifically proven to be effective than older drugs or lifestyle interventions, right? So despite knowing that there's better routes out there, our medical system is so ingrained and driven by pharmacy and drugs, which is ultimately driven by money, right? And so that's another big thing that's wrong currently. And so I think it's really important, just in short, to re-answer your question, I really feel that the biggest problems with the current paradigm is that it doesn't look at the patient as a whole. Most providers are not trained in true prevention, right? And conventional medicine is based on drugs and surgery, whose driving force is money, not the well-being of people.
It's interesting, when I go to the doctor, the medical profession, they're good folks. Everybody has, the intent is in their heart and they want to help people, but they are conditioned. They are conditioned by the drug companies, and the fact that it is very compartmentalized. Dr. Jack, you're absolutely right. It's almost like when you go to get your car fixed, right? It used to be in the long time ago, you'd go to a mechanic and that mechanic would know all facets of that car. So if you brought it to one guy, he can fix your transmission, he can fix your starter, he can fix all kinds of stuff in your car. Today, when you go to get your car fixed, everybody is specialized in a particular part of that car. So they're certified technicians in the engine, or certified technician in the transmission. So you can see that our medical environment is operating the exact same way. Now, I'm 58, so when I go to the doctor, which is not often because I try not to, go there, but when I do have to go there, because there are times when, you have to get maybe stitches or you have a broken bone, whatever it may be. So they will say to me, what drugs are you on? Because they're expecting you to have at least one or two, maybe even more drugs that you're going to write on your sheet of paper, your intake form. And I'll say none. And then the nurse is doing all this work and she'll say, you're not on any drugs? So I said, no, I'm not on any drugs, not blood pressure or anything. And the point I'm making is that they are expecting that when a patient comes in, that they're going to be on something. And to me, that in itself says there's something very, very wrong with the process. What are your thoughts on that?
I agree. And that's where Chinese medicine comes in. Getting a needle put in the body has very little to no side effects, right? Taking an herbal, intervention, when done properly by an herbalist, has little to no side effects. As a matter of fact, it helps with side effects of pharmaceuticals. I have a lot of people who, like we talked about earlier, brain zaps, are having horrible withdrawal symptoms. And, I can put together an herbal preparation that's going to help to adjust their central nervous system. And that's stuff that I love to do. People are suffering out there. And I think it's important that they understand that there's people, out there like Dr. Jack and I, who specialize in this very thing.
I think another good point to bring up here is that if you look at the United States, we spend more on healthcare than any other developed nation. Mm-hmm. And it was funny, in one of my clinical residencies in Chicago, we had this bar graph in our charting room. And this bar graph showed the annual budget on healthcare per American. And in the United States, it's around $6,000 per every U.S. citizen that we spend on healthcare. And then it also shows life expectancy. And so for the life expectancy is highest in Japan. And they say, they spend like $1,000 per person on healthcare. In this country, we spend about $6,000 per person on healthcare, and our life expectancy is, let's say, 79. These statistics change every year, so I don't have the specific ones in front of me. If you look at Cuba, okay, Cuba spends about $60 per person on healthcare a year, and their life expectancy is within a year of the United States. So more drugs, more surgery does not equate a longer, more fulfilling life. And that was something that struck me when you brought up your example of going to the doctor and the nurse kind of being baffled the fact that you weren't on drugs, right? Drugs don't make us healthier. They try to stop disease. They don't progress us towards wellness. And so, the trajectory that we're moving on right now is not sustainable. At this point, the GDP for healthcare is going to be astronomical in this country as we age, right? And the majority of our taxes are going to go towards healthcare, and we're not living better lives, right? We're living a little bit longer, but if you look at other countries and developed nations who are spending a fraction of what we're spending and who have a better outcome in life, that tells you something. So if you look at Japan, the diet that they eat, the lifestyle that they live, that's why they live longer, not because they spend more money on drugs and surgery. And so, it's definitely something that's going to have to change. And, I feel that integrative medicine, whether that's with an acupuncturist, an herbalist, a Chinese medicine practitioner, a naturopathic physician, or even medical doctors who are seeking postdoctoral education in these interventions, such as functional medicine, we're going to be the ones that are the driving forces to change this, because what we're doing right now is not sustainable and it's not working. And I think that's also an important thing to mention, is that there are medical doctors out there, and I meet them at continuing education seminars who are they went to med school to help people, and they got eaten alive. They were chewed up and spat out the other end, and all that they became were, really good at prescribing drugs, right? And they don't want to do that. They want to help people. So they've gone out and sought advanced education in learning how to practice true preventative medicine with diet, exercise, nutrition, and those types of things.
Jack and Melissa, I was wondering if you could talk to us a little bit about the growth of the alternative medicine, alternative health field, naturopathy, and all of the stuff that you guys are involved in. And the reason why I'm asking that question is because there may be some folks that who are listening that really don't know much about this, so they may think it's niche. And of course, it's not niche, and I know it's growing, but to hear it from you guys, I think would probably resonate a little more with the audience. So if you could just take us through that a little bit about how fast the field is growing and the direction that you see it going in the future.
Our specific field is absolutely growing. So when it comes to these alternative and complementary approaches, which really should be first-line interventions, not a complement or alternative to allopathic medicine, it is absolutely growing. So, more states are recognizing licensure for these different types of approaches to medicine. Insurance companies are covering these interventions. And there are residencies in integrative medicine. But I'll be honest with you, my experience with that is it's still, like you said, it's still very medically driven by that paradigm. And when they venture too far on the fringe, they get yanked in front of their medical board for, not practicing the norm. The nice thing is, as being a true natural practitioner trained in all facets of, natural medicine as well as drugs and surgery, is that the norm for what we practice is alternative medicine. So when we're doing these things and these interventions, we're not getting pulled in front of a board asking us, well, why are you talking about diet and lifestyle and doing acupuncture for depression? Why aren't you following the algorithm which says depressed patient, prescribe X. If X fails, prescribe Y. If Y fails, prescribe X, Y, and Z together, right? And so it's definitely something that it is growing. I think the other thing is that, people are starting to wake up to what's going on, and, they're realizing that this is not, and I personally think that the TV is a great marketing tool for me. The amount of drug commercials that are on today with the side effects that are being listed after the drugs, most people just listen to that and they're like, well, you're out of your mind. And, that's a whole nother conversation. There's only 2 developed nations that allow drug commercials as advertisements. And I personally don't think it's right. I don't think we should be advertising these prescription drugs to consumers. That needs to be something that a doctor prescribes to patients, not a patient coming in and say, oh, well, I saw this commercial with this dark cloud that said you could take the dark cloud away if I took this drug. So I want that drug, right? Because doctors want to make their patients happy. And so they're going to prescribe them what they think that they want. But I would definitely say that the field is growing. It's becoming more accepted. And people are looking for their alternative. And, I'll be honest with you, things are different in different pockets of the country. We're in the same area here. We're here on the Southeast coast. We're in where we live and practice is a little bit more progressive than the rest of the state of North Carolina. But I will tell you, medicine here is about 5 years behind the Midwest, which is about 15 years behind the West Coast. Okay. So these conversations were taking place on the West Coast a decade ago, right? And so that information is slowly making its way across the country, and people are starting to realize that there is an alternative to drugs and surgery, and it's safe and effective, and it's more affordable and sustainable.
Well, you guys are doing great things. I will talk about one story because my co-host is here, and Rebecca had issues with her feet with a lot of pain, and she would go to the traditional doctor, and they would say, well, it's all right, rheumatoid arthritis. And if the drugs are not working, then it's kind of a shrug of the shoulders. Well, you're just going to have to live with it. It's just the way it is. And Dr. Mel, I want to thank you. And I know Rebecca wants to thank you because what you guys did to bring back the health to Rebecca and making her feet feel so much better, right?
Yeah, I'm able to, the acupuncture and all this other support that I've been given as a patient has been really life-changing, because when I first came in, I wasn't really exercising. I couldn't go for a walk for very far because I was having so much pain in my feet. And Dr. Mel's like, oh, yeah, I can handle that. So it's just like, I think her answer to everything, which I love. It's like, yeah, we can do that. We can take care of that, which, my experience has been you really look at the whole person, and we, started just like you had said with diet and kind of went from there. And any kind of issue that I bring in, you guys have been able to address. And it's a wonderful feeling to have a place to go where your physicians know you and care about you and can address anything. And it's not like trying to figure out, well, I got to find a specialist who can handle this, and looking up, trying to get referrals and making phone calls and all that kind of thing. When you can go to one place and have everything taken care of in a great environment with knowledgeable people, it's just a really wonderful thing.
And it was no small accomplishment. I'm being dead serious. I mean, it was just really an amazing thing that you got her feedback to the point where they are healthy. So I tip my hat to you guys for that. And I also want to say that you do a lot of work outside of your daily practice. Like, you have the yoga class that I've been going to on Thursday nights. That's just good stuff. You're putting yourself out there, and it's obvious you want to help people. And that's very, very clear, because you're out there and you want to make sure people are feeling good and they have that sense of wellness about them. Just real good stuff all around. Now, I do want to mention a couple of things here. So I know we talked about mental illness here and depression and so on, but I also want the audience to understand that to get a fuller perspective of what Dr. Jack and Dr. Mel do, and I'm just going to read a couple of things here, and I got this off your website, guys. You treat acute and chronic pain, injuries, headaches and migraines, neurological conditions, arthritis, fibromyalgia, gynecological exams, hormone imbalance, fertility, acute and chronic illnesses, autoimmune, fatigue and insomnia, men's health, sinus and ear infections, depression and anxiety, allergies and asthma, and there's a bunch of other stuff that I didn't say because I would be going on for a lot longer. Some really good stuff. And Jack, it's like you said before, it's holistic. It's connected. We talked about where I said when you go to bring your car in to get fixed, it used to be years ago the mechanic knew everything about your car and he could fix whatever it is that you came in with. And today it's in modules. It's in silos. This is how they work, and this is how medicine works. And you guys have broken down those silos. So it's just really, really, really good stuff. Thank you so much for coming on the show and just talking with us. And, anytime you guys want to come back, you have an open invitation to talk about whatever it is you'd like to talk about. But before we head out, would you like to give out your information so folks know how to connect with you and get in touch with you in case they get intrigued and piqued by our show?
Absolutely. And just to step back for a moment, I just want to say thank you so much for your compliments there. It means a lot to us. And we do strive to really help people. That's what our driving force in life is. And, we really can't take credit for it. It's the medicine, and it's our predecessors who shared this medicine with us that's allowed us to apply our knowledge and clinical experience to help others. And yes, definitely, we'd love to share some information. We can be reached at www.carolinanaturalmedicine.com. And also our office phone number is 919-650-1789. And we'd be more than happy to hear from you via email if you'd like. And that's just info, INFO, at carolinanaturalmedicine.com. Thank you so much for having us. And we definitely look forward for being back and talking about more topics. There's a plethora of information out there, and we spend a lot of time and energy to accumulate it, and we love to share it with others. So thank you so much.
You guys will be happy to know that I am practicing trying to balance myself on one foot in yoga.
Good.
Okay.
He's getting there.
And this is what I always say in my classes. What do I say? Thank your body, right? So if anything I could say to people listening, is, love yourself, love your body, put good food in it, do some exercise, you practice breathing. These things are just foundational. Get good sleep, just these little things, it can make such a profound effect on our health. We're so busy, We've got so much going on in our lives. We don't take the time to reflect. And in my medicine, that is what we do. We cultivate energy. So if I could say anything, every day, thank your body and try and cultivate your chi.
And that concludes another Sage of Quay interview, and I hope you enjoyed the discussion as much as I did. Links to my guests' websites and social media are listed in the show notes below. And as always, I'd like to thank everyone for listening and visiting the blog. You can get to the blog by typing in sageofquayradio.blogspot.com or simply head over to our hub website at sageofquay.com. Also, if you get a moment, please visit laboroflovemusic.com to listen to my album, Leaving Dystopia. And remember, live in truth and always serve creation. It's really that simple. See everyone next week. Be safe, enjoy, and God bless.
Sometimes I feel so tired, but today I feel so wired. And I look through my crystal ball. All I see is that wall. So many people are standing still, drifting away. They lost their will. I just want to shake them and give them ears. Wake up, stop living in fear. You are human. You are a beautiful soul. You are one with creation. Come on, get up, let's go. Sometimes I feel so cheated, but today I won't be defeated. I cut the chains and I break free. Open your eyes and you will see. You are human. You are a beautiful soul. You are one with creation. Come on, get up, let's go. We are here to live and learn. Another life, another turn. Don't be afraid to shine. Don't be afraid to open your mind. You are human. You are a beautiful soul. You are one with creation. Come on, get up, let's go. beautiful soul.